Greetings in good late morning. It is Monday, August 24th. This is a regular meeting of the Eugene. Hearing a little feedback, maybe. Okay. So today we do have public comment on our agenda first, and then we will go to deliberations on the digital sign code amendment. I do want to remind everybody that we are meeting virtually due to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives executive order. And to join our meeting, you can visit the Planning Commission's website. Also, I just want to remind commissioners that the chat function is not to be used during the meeting because it interferes with our ability for transparency. And so I'll go ahead and start off with agenda item A, which is public comment. The Planning Commission reserves 10 minutes at the beginning of this meeting for public comment. The public may comment on any matter except for items scheduled for a public hearing or items for which the record has already closed. And I'll go ahead and discussion on time limit. Let's see, I have a couple of attendees that are staff. So if maybe Amy, you want to confirm, I do not have any hands raised for public comment.
I don't see anybody's hands raised.
Okay, makes it easy. Well, then we'll go ahead and move on to item number B, deliberations and action on the digital sign code amendment. And I am going to have Janessa kind of lead us through just kind of where we were and where we're at now. And I'll lead us through a discussion. And as always, if you want to be in the queue, go ahead and just raise your virtual hand there and I will call on you in order. So Janessa.
Thank you. Real quick before I get started on a quick presentation, Amy, would you mind promoting Larissa to a panelist? She's in the attendee section, but she should be a panelist.
Sure, I'll do it right.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I have a few slides that I'm just going to kind of walk us through a little bit, remind everybody where we're at, why we're here, and what we're hoping to do today. So, find. Get my screen set up here a little bit so I can navigate. Bear with me. Okay, so you all should be seeing the presentation on the screen. So good afternoon. I'm Janessa Dragovich, Land Use Supervisor in the Building and Permit Services Division. And I'm back today with Mike McCarrow, Associate Planner, as well as Lauren Summers from the City Attorney's Office. And we also have Transportation Planning staff with us, Larissa Varela and Logan Tellis. So today, oops. So first I wanted to kind of remind us where we've been with the project. So last September, Council had us do a work session to kind of go into the topic of digital signs in response to Councilor Pryor's poll requesting a look at updating the Eugene sign code to allow for the regulated use of electronic and digital sign and billboard technology. So at the end of the work session, they initiated the proposed amendments before you. Then on July 21st of this year, we did a work session with the Planning Commission to introduce the project and provide the council direction and go over the draft code that we had developed. Then on the 28th of July, a week later, we held a public hearing before you, and you heard some testimony from individuals at that hearing, as well as had some testimony that came in to review. Then on August 11th, we had our first deliberation meeting. And at that time, we had received a Public Works memo regarding the transportation and safety concerns. So while we had originally kind of soft closed the record, we reopened it with the submission of that memo to give you a chance to review it, as well as to make it available for our interested parties to take a look at it and give them a chance to provide testimony as well in response. So that's kind of where we're at now. Today's August 24th. We're here to do the follow-up deliberation and hopefully to take some action on developing a recommendation for council. So this is for context, this is the motion that council passed at their work session last September. So as you can see, the scope was pretty narrow and focused on allowing digital billboards and reader boards. They also included an allowance for staff to recommend changes that are either legally required or necessary to clarify the current regulations. So with that direction, staff developed and proposed the amendments that you have the draft of with 5 main types of changes. The first 3 are more for housekeeping and clarifying purposes. So we added some definitions and made some clarifications. And then the other 2 related to digital sign components for service station uses and signage for drive-through uses. The 4th gets to the digital reader boards, which we're calling them digital signs, and made that definition to kind of go away from the traditional usage of reader board, which most people think of it in terms of those plastic letters that you put on your template, your sign template. The 5th one was the biggest, and that was to allow digital billboards. This is just a visual example of what that digital reader board is for the institutional uses. And note that this was brought up at council with respect to the electronic message centers at schools and other like parks and recreation facilities. And so that's why the proposed allowance is limited to institutional uses. Then this is just another visual. This is the digital billboard component. So where we're at today, we're hoping to move forward with a recommendation to City Council. So after you deliberate, there are 3 possible outcomes or motions that you could do. If you like it as proposed, you could, recommend that Council adopt the proposed draft. If you generally support it, but you have concerns, then we can make suggestions or propose changes and take that to Council. Or if you basically don't want to support the amendments, that's an option as well. So thinking that we're probably going to land somewhere in the 2nd category, then something to keep in mind is that your concerns can either be tied to a specific recommendation, or they can be kind of a general concern to just elevate for council consideration as we move forward. So for instance, the dwell time has been brought up, and that's been something that you've heard testimony supporting, both shortening the 10 seconds that staff had originally proposed or lengthening the requirement to increase the dwell time. So you can either be specific about whether you want us to go with the 8 seconds or 10 seconds, or you can just elevate it as a concern that you think that still needs a little more consideration and input maybe from the public as we go forward to council. And so you can just elevate the concern if that's if you're not landing on a real specific recommendation. This is also a good time to point out that we had kind of 3 main areas that we really need a little bit more clarification on from you and as well as council when we go forward. And that is the dwell times and the location allowances. So where the digital billboards would be allowed, and the spacing requirement. So currently we have it drafted at 1,200 linear feet between 2 digital billboards facing the same direction. That's a potential standard that you might want to make a different recommendation for. So that's kind of where I wanted to just recap and kind of reorient us before we go into the discussion today. I did receive an email from Commissioner Fragola that had some specific questions. And so I think before we open it up to more broad questions, I'd like to kind of go through those 4 questions that Commissioner Fragola had given us that I provided to Public Works. And then I'll be looking to Public Works staff to help answer those and have some discussion with you. So with that, the first question had to do with the corridors. that have been identified as high crash streets in the city's Vision Zero action plan, and that are part of the identified areas where digital billboards are being proposed on major arterials. So Logan, is that enough of an introduction to that topic, and do you want to jump in now?
Sure, I think so. So I have included in the chat box a link to our Vision Zero High Crash Network map. So specifically within the context of corridors where billboards are currently allowed, I'm seeing 11th Avenue, 7th Avenue, Coburg Road, and Highway 99 as having some overlap between our high crash network and the locations where digital billboards could eventually land. So I think that kind of ties in pretty closely with the next question, Janessa, if you don't mind me jumping over, which asks high crash intersections that have some type of proximity to locations where digital billboards could end up. Those high crash intersections are also on that same high crash network map that you can access in the chat box, or for anyone who doesn't have access to the chat box, it's on the City of Eugene's Vision Zero webpage as well. But intersections I'm seeing some overlap include 11th and Danebo, 11th and Teen, 11th and Alder, 7th and Jefferson, Highway 99 and Roosevelt, Highway 99 and Royal, Highway 99 and 5th, and Coburg and Oakwant. So for anyone who isn't familiar, our high crash network map looks at locations. It was a data analysis process that used, I believe, approximately 9 years of crash data. And it looked at locations with a documented history of traffic crash fatalities and traffic crash major injuries for all modes, including vehicles, bicyclists, and pedestrians. It consolidated a list of the top 15, worst spots for each of these three demographics, and then merged it all onto this high crash network map. Naturally, there's a lot of overlap between those three lists. A lot of streets that are dangerous for pedestrians are also dangerous for bicyclists, and even dangerous for motorists. So this is sort of the best sort of summary map of our major traffic safety concerns in Eugene, but it certainly can get more site specific. This sort of summarizes our crash statistics at the entire street segment level. There are certainly some more compressed areas of concern that aren't represented on this map, but this is a good summary introduction to our Vision Zero data analysis process.
Thank you. And just to be clear, I don't have that's not the map that's on the screen, but I did put up the billboard map that we've been using throughout the project as just a reference. So the third question was the variables listed at the end of page 3 and beginning at page 4, and which of these are significant concerns for the major arterials that were identified for digital billboards, and where?
Yeah, so for this, I think if the Planning Commission and Council wanted to dig in deeper into traffic safety considerations as they relate to digital billboard installations, we could certainly take some time and undergo a more in-depth analysis process of these variables. Some of them are going to require more data collection on our part. Specifically, I'm thinking about access density, like density of driveways. That's a great example of something where you would likely need to sort of count to, for lack of a better term, count. There's not a really great geospatial data file on sort of those access points existing within, the city of Eugene. That's something we could take a closer look at. Another great example, bicycle and pedestrian data. Some locations we do have bicycle and pedestrian counts. Some locations we don't. And if there's an interest in sort of evaluating that deeper, we can certainly go out and collect more data. I know that in this question, pedestrian and bicycle data was flagged as a particular area of interest. I will say that like in the context of streets that currently allow billboard installations, I strongly suspect that the downtown portions of 6th and 7th and the areas closest to the University of Oregon's campus would be probably the most bicycle and pedestrian active areas that could potentially be impacted by digital billboard installations. But once again, we can certainly go out and collect more data on this if there is desire on the part of others for us to do so. I'm seeing a hand. Tiffany, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do. I just want to jump in with a question related to this before you move on to the next one. So I'm assuming that the data that you're collecting that illustrates that these are high crash sites, or would have higher propensity for accidents, cannot at this time be attributed to digital billboards. So
No.
I'm curious as to what the city what is being done currently to address those intersections and those areas as part of the Vision Zero plan.
So the Vision Zero action plan certainly has a strong infrastructure component. The plan was sort of formally adopted in, I believe, spring of 2019. So we're still in the fairly early stages of implementing the plan. One thing that I'm particularly excited about on this front is we're receiving grant funding through our MPO to do an intersection study for all of our Vision Zero intersections. And that will give us an opportunity to really do a deep dive into, very site-specific problems that take place at each of these intersections, maybe come up with some conceptual design alternatives. There's definitely room for us to pull in some consulting help as well on the engineering front. So I think that is going to be a really great opportunity for us to make progress on safety at our Vision Zero intersections. The funding for that, so we've been approved for it, but the funding cycle actually opens up in 2022. So that's the soonest work on that could begin, and with us tapping into those resources. But certainly there are ongoing infrastructure projects and safety, smaller scale safety improvements that take place across the city of Eugene.
Right.
Just,
So let me just follow up then.
Sure.
So I'm going to make the assumption, please correct me if I'm wrong, that Public Works is making the assumption based on your recommendations that that digital billboards would have to be assumed to exacerbate these already bad areas. Is that is that an assumption that I'm safe to make?
Sure. Yeah, I'll offer some clarification on that. I think for a lot of folks, reading crash studies isn't something that they do every day. So I want to be clear. There is a broad diversity of findings on this subject, and I think that's partially. I want to be clear that that's partially reflective of the fact that transportation planning and traffic operations is very context specific. So it's completely possible for one municipality to install this type of installation, see considerable impacts, and another municipality goes and implements this type of installation with less impacts. So when I look at the body of literature on this subject, I'm inclined for my eye to be drawn to sort of the worst case possibilities, because especially when you're looking at crash data. I think it's important to keep in mind of what is sort of the worst potential outcome, and plan for that. I think that's just sort of partially the psyche of transportation planning and transportation engineering as a whole, particularly as someone who is working on the Vision Zero program, particularly in a city that values traffic safety so highly. So I will say that I can't specifically speak to the scale of impact, but I am, based on the body of literature that's out there, assuming that there will be some degree of impact of digital billboards on distracted driving, and that may manifest in our recorded traffic crash history. Now, I do also want to offer the clarification that in the state of Oregon, there are certain criteria for what types of traffic crashes get recorded in the official record. So while we can track, we can certainly track increases or decreases. We're kind of in an interesting point in time where the state standards on this have recently been revised. So prior to, I believe, 2017 and earlier, sort of the property damage like value associated with getting into that data set was 1,500. Starting in the 2018 data set, that's bumping up to 2,500. So we're gonna see sort of an artificial bottlenecking to an extent. And that's something that, you know, concerns me a little in terms of before and after crash studies on sort of subjects that straddle this weird transition period for the state data set. Sorry, that's just sort of my rambly answer, but yes, I do think that it's likely that there will be some degree of impact. I just can't speak to specifically what that degree of impact will be.
Okay. I do have Commissioner Fragla with her hand up. And then I'll let you move on. So go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Somebody took my hand down, so I was trying to do that first. So Logan, I'm sorry, I thought you were done. If you wanted to finish, I can leave my question.
Please go ahead.
So thank you very much for answering the questions that I had. I appreciate that. And Tiffany's question actually clarified a lot of what I was thinking. I was wondering if you could speak to, you know, based on the information you provided us in the document, you had some pretty specific recommendations for ourselves. And I was wondering if you could speak to that. And I'm also curious, will you also be making recommendations to City Council?
So the recommendations that live in that last memorandum that you guys reviewed, that was primarily meant to sort of be a brainstorm list of options that could potentially improve the safety outcomes as, you know, the city of Eugene moves forward with installing digital billboards. Now, I will say that there's plenty of room to work with PDD and workshop those further. I think that is something that may be necessary if we were going to go forth and sort of include them in some of the amendment language in the future. We have not specifically discussed Public Works speaking to City Council about this. Janessa, I don't know if you want to speak to that more. It's just not something that's come up between us, but I'd be happy to do it if you would like me to.
I think that a lot of that it will depend in part on how specific Planning Commission recommendations are. So if we're really bucketing some concerns, then I think that it's highly likely that council will want to maybe hear directly from Public Works staff around the transportation safety concerns. So I'm hopeful that you're willing to go forth with us if that's the case, if that's the recommendation that we come out with, is that we need to do some more work still.
Great.
Okay, and now I do have Commissioner Beeson with his hand up, so I'm going to let him go ahead and ask his question because I'm assuming that it's related to this, and then Logan, I'll have you continue. So Ken, go ahead.
Thank you. My question is related to this. As I read the memo, Logan, I went pretty quickly to also wanting context-specific information. So I understand your comment there, and I guess to that point, as I was listening to what you were talking about just a few minutes ago, we have, and I may not characterize these exactly right, but we have in the city of Eugene some digital billboards now, or digital signs. I'm thinking specifically of the sign at Matt Knight Arena. My question is, do you guys have any data at all about crashes there before and after? The sign's been up for a few years now. And so anyway, that's kind of my question. Do we have any data with respect to the existing digital billboards we have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will be honest that this is a fairly new subject on our radar at Public Works. I could go into depending on the year of installation, if someone can provide me with a specific and accurate year of installation, I could go back and take a look at the crash data, assuming that it's not, assuming that it wasn't installed before 2007, I could go back in the state's records and take a look at whether there's an increase in recorded crash history before and after installation.
I believe.
Okay, thanks.
10 or 11
sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Janessa.
Sorry, Mike can back me up. He might remember this more, but I want to say Matthew Knight Arena sign was circa 2010 or 11.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect, thank you. So Logan, if you want to go ahead and continue with the questions that you were clarifying, go ahead.
So Janessa, I think the next one was the one about
equity,
defining an existing transportation equity concern. I'm just going to go ahead and jump in on that one. So this is admittedly a subjective and evolving term for us at Public Works. There's a lot of energy and attention going into improving our transportation equity outcomes. You know, there are certainly demographics that are more vulnerable from a transportation perspective than others. These include some obvious categories like residents with disabilities, residents from vulnerable age categories. It also can include low-income residents, residents of color. We know that different demographics of people are affected by traffic crashes at disproportionate rates, at least nationally, we know that. Now, in the context of the city of Eugene, in the context of our transportation planning team, there are equity mapping efforts underway to really sort of better define what we mean when we say, you know, a community of concern or, you know, a transportation equity concern. It includes a lot of census data from these vulnerable demographics, and trying to decide exactly what we want to include on that map and how we want to weight different variables. So that mapping process is still underway, but I will say that the western portions of Eugene are very heavily discussed within this context. I think no matter what methodology we use, they will end up on the map. So I think when I look at the billboard, the map that displays where billboards are and aren't allowed in Eugene, I think portions of West 11th could potentially fall within the category of what we would consider a transportation equity concern. Now, you know, as I said, it's an evolving term. It's a little squishy. I admit all of that. But that's just something that in the memo I wanted to highlight, just because there is so much discussion going on about it within our department.
Okay, Commissioner Isaacson's got his hand up, so Dan, go ahead.
So this may be a little bit wonky, so forgive me. There's the transition that you have an entire population going over from one style of billboard to another. And in that, it's going to be a lot, I would assume, more distracting for that population than if they were already used to it. So, for example, I lived 12 years in Chicago. The idea of a digital sign in front of me, I don't think I spent 5 seconds looking at them because they're just everywhere, right? But I will say that when I first moved there, it was very distracting for me because I was not used to it. So are there any studies that anybody can cite, or has there been any research into that grace period between when a community goes from nothing to digital? And is there a plan in place or any discussion about how to minimize that? In other words, onboarding this slowly.
You know, to be honest with you, I haven't come across any research that looks at sort of that learning period where people who frequently travel a corridor sort of adjust perhaps to an installation. So I haven't seen any research on that subject. I do agree with you that with any type of new roadway condition, there is sort of that learning grace period where the traffic safety concern is at its highest, and then perhaps thereafter it reduces a bit. So I don't know that I could comment specifically about digital billboards within that sort of framework. But I think that you're right in the sense that, you know, slow exposure is always better when it comes to new things that drivers aren't perhaps accustomed to seeing in their local context. That's just sort of my perspective on it as well.
My only follow-up real quick would be, forgive me, if we don't have someone else who is essentially taken the beach here and been the guinea pig, maybe we can use this as an opportunity, if we're going to be going through this, to collect that data so other communities have the ability to draw from our experience and use that data for their own selves.
Yeah, yeah. No matter how many of these installations, you know, go out at the beginning, we would certainly have a heavy interest in looking at the data and monitoring. I haven't discussed this with anyone else, but maybe even doing sort of like a video camera study. We do those sometimes. So yeah, we'll certainly be interested in collecting data on before and after conditions when these go out. Oh, Tiffany, I think you're muted. I see you talking though.
I unmuted myself, but okay. Commissioner Taylor is in the queue. Go ahead, Kristen.
Thank you. I just want to, Logan, thank you for your thoughtful responses. Actually, it's great. Commissioner Fragola and Commissioner Isaacson actually touched on some of my questions. And so I have a follow-up that actually has to do with both. And I'm going to be less specific and just inquire about whether it's adjustment period or transportation equity or kind of understanding of crash data in relation to the impact of digital billboards. What are there jurisdictions that are ahead of us comprehensively or in part that we've been able to draw upon? And if so, similar to what Commissioner Isaacs had said, where our data could be used, have you identified other jurisdictions where we can use data in order to better inform our current decision, or at least how to move forward?
Yeah, that's also a great question. You know, most of the research that I have, most of the publicly available research on this subject is sort of through that university level research, at least in the context of the United States. It would be nice to connect with another municipality on this subject. You know, it's a little hard to identify municipalities that have been through this process. It's a slightly obscure thing to sort of Google, trying to find, you know, which towns have digital billboard installations and which don't, which discuss transportation safety as a part of that process and which didn't. I do know that well, I can say that Public Works has had a bit of a conversation with the city of Portland on this subject. We do know that they have a handful, I believe a very small handful of digital billboard installations that were grandfathered in. I believe this all took place, oh gosh, maybe 15 to 20 years ago. Their code and their permitting process was a little more ambiguous on the subject a few of them went out before they really even realized what they were permitting. And the city staff members that were responsible for commercial sign regulation sort of scrambled and revised their code and permitting process to explicitly disallow these types of installations. My understanding is there was a bit of a federal court case that sort of ultimately culminated in the city of Portland not being able to revoke those permits. So those installations, I believe, are still out today. Unfortunately, this all took place before the state of Oregon's, like further back than the state of Oregon's crash database goes. It would have been really nice to see some before and after statistics on that, but I just don't think that's going to be possible. But yeah, you know, we reached out to them on this subject just because they are the only other Vision Zero city in Oregon. Certainly, they are a huge regional player in transportation planning and engineering. So we did reach out and have that conversation with them. That's sort of the most we were able to glean from looking at Portland, though.
Logan, Commissioner Borofsky.
Thank you. I guess I'm just going to kind of go into some comments that I have as far as thinking of how to move forward with some recommendations. So after reading the memo from Public Works, it got me thinking about digital billboards and the areas that we're thinking of putting them in. One of the things that came up was, you know, possibly limiting areas that have high other distractions, i.e. curb cuts, bus routes, pedestrian crossings, those types of things. You know, years ago, I worked on the access management standards for the city of Eugene, and we looked into, you know, where is best to put entrances to businesses as opposed to intersections and all those types of things. And we did a study area, and one of the study areas we did was West 11th, and West 11th is just a nightmare as far as access management. There are far too many curb cuts, far too many things turning in and out, left turn lanes. Now we've got bus rapid transit lanes going in and out of there. So for me, that looks like an area that I'm worried about because of all the distractions. The other thing that the research that was brought up in the memorandum said was, you know, it was side swipes and rear end crashes. And those were, from what I'm reading on that, it seemed like those were on limited access highways. You know, it seemed like most of the data was coming from areas that were, you know, you're on a freeway, you're on a limited access highway. And if you're getting distracted and sideswiping the car next to you as a result of possibly as a result of a digital billboard, if there is somebody trying to turn into Wendy's and there's a bus EMX and there's a crossing at a pedestrian crossing and there's a car trying to turn left, and now you add a digital billboard into there, that gives me pause. Just because we're adding one more distraction into an area that's tough. Commissioner Beeson brought up, you know, Matthew Knight Arena. Matthew Knight Arena has less of those distractions. There are no, on Franklin Boulevard, at least on the eastbound side, there are no curb cuts. They're all signalized intersections. There's a boulevard and a buffered EMX lane that goes between it. So it has less conflict points than some of these other areas we're looking at. So those are some of my thoughts. The other area that I'm very concerned about is the one that we're actually blocking. We have potentially blocked off, and that's the area down Hilliard, Mill Street, Coburg Road, you know, the Whole Foods, Coburg Road interchange there. Again, there may not be as many access points there, but there are a lot of different things that you need to be aware of when you're negotiating that section of our transportation system. So limiting the amount of distractions in those areas would be something that I would be interested in. How we go about doing that, I'm not sure, whether it's the pilogram, but for me, definitely, if we move forward with this, I would still like to leave those 2 sections out that we have in pink. And the other thing that we need to consider here is, if we move something forward and it gets adopted by council, the chances of it getting changed again within the next 20 years are slim to none, because they do not like to dip into the sign code section of our code. As Mike can relate to you, it's been a long time since we dipped into it. There's a lot of things that should be looked at, and we're being looked at very narrow items. And so those are just kind of some of the thoughts that I have when we move forward with making a recommendation.
Hey, thanks, John. I'm going to chime in really quick, and I know I have Commissioners Taylor and Ramey in the queue, but I do want to make mention of this, because I think it might help us with our deliberations. In, as Janessa explained, like one of the things that we can do, rather than just a straight up or straight down, you know, yes or no, is move to make a recommendation to move forward, but also more or less flag these areas. We don't necessarily have to say, we want to go with the 10 seconds, or we want to go with everything but the pink areas, or, you know, we don't want to put it on West 11th. Personally, my opinion is that we didn't get a lot of feedback from the community. And this is one of those types of decisions that we will hear from the community after the fact, regardless of the decision. So I think that, you know, one good option that I know I would be supportive would be, you know, moving forward with adoption, but flagging those areas, just so that council pays specific attention to the input that they're hearing, because I'm assuming that they're going to get a lot more feedback from the general public. So anyhow, I just wanted to say that, because I think that in your thoughts and the way that you're thinking about this, I don't know that it has to be specified super, you know, it doesn't have to be super specific, as Commissioner Borofsky mentions, as far as, you know, where and how frequent and all of those things. We can certainly say, you know, we don't know yet, but we think you should pay close attention to those things. So I'm going to go with Commissioner Taylor, followed by Commissioner Rainey.
Thank you. I'm going to try to be concise. Sometimes brainstorming is hard to kind of get yourself organized concisely. So here are some of, I guess, my ideas and kind of the way I'm thinking about this. Is one, Logan actually stated something that I think is really important, and that is streets each have individual contexts and characteristics. So to generalize about any street like West 11th versus Franklin and making a direct comparison as a way to make this decision, I'm not sure is really appropriate without understanding the details and context of specific intersections, because each intersection actually changes. You've got designation, you've got driveways, you've got bulb outs, you've got our cars parked. Are there any traffic calming devices? What is the speed? There's a whole bunch of characteristics, not only in terms of how traffic moves, but then you've got crash data. It has its own context and characteristics. So I think that's really important to remember here. And Logan kind of insinuated that too, said it directly, that this is complex. There's a grant that's coming in terms of doing additional study. There are unknowns. There are things we don't know about. What do digital billboards, what type of impact do they have in already high crash intersection areas, for instance? Really, what is that contribution? Commissioner Isaacson brings up another good point, and it doesn't have to just be a digital billboard. It can be a brand new building. Like right now, I live by the university and Hayward Field. it had traffic patterns are largely different because of that construction during the entire construction period, including right now. It's almost like slowed down to a parking lot pace on the street because people are looking at that new building. So it's not just digital billboards, it's new construction, it's the evolution of our city. So here are a couple of my thoughts is that I would like us to be able to have evolution of our city. I'll just use that term. So digital billboard, that we have billboards. It makes sense to go digital. There's sustainability reasons. I mean, there are some really kind of fundamental practical reasons as well as just evolution of a city. With that said, I think where I would love more information. I'd love for us to be in a place to actually be more informed. We're not right now. It sounds like we're going to have by 2022 some additional information. We've got some funding there. And maybe as we start to network, we can get more information from other jurisdictions, even if they're just doing partial analysis. Especially because Vision Zero is more or less kind of a newer holistic approach to transportation planning. So what I like is I like tools. I like tools in the code. I do agree with Logan that feedback from Portland is that if we wholesale approve it, that could have some consequences. You can't necessarily take it back. So how can we be thoughtful in our current position with, for instance, digital billboards is requiring studies. So it's not holistically allowed. There's maybe some burden of proof on the applicant to actually do some research to demonstrate some of these pieces that we don't have information on, so that we can allow kind of a dynamic evolution, yet still not have holistic kind of adoption of these code standards. I'm not sure what that would look like. I'm not sure if it would be, how it would be included in code. But I guess that's where I sit right now, is that I think we have more tools. So rather than just a concern, that positive solution place that I go to is what would that look like in code where we have identified concern areas and what additional data could be helpful to make a decision. So that's it.
All right, take myself off mute. Thank you. That was actually very insightful, very helpful for me. I have Commissioner Rainey and then Commissioner Fragola next.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I guess afternoon by now. Logan, a quick question for you. What faces us currently is this dilemma that the billboard industry wants a lot of traffic. That's what they survive on. A lot of traffic also generates, apparently, a lot of crashes. So these two things are running into each other, literally. So can you tell me, the drawing that I'm looking at was the crash density, I think it was called density. Is that raw number of crashes, or is that percentage of crash per traffic?
Can you clarify exactly what you're looking at? Are you looking at a map?
This map that's titled High Crash Network.
Oh, the High Crash Network. Yeah, so the High Crash Network looks specifically at traffic fatalities and severe injuries because it's tied to our Vision Zero program, which is all about mitigating traffic deaths and severe injuries.
Is it raw numbers or is it a weighted average?
It's raw numbers. It's raw numbers.
Okay, so
it's raw numbers over the course of an entire street corridor.
So anywhere where there is more traffic, there will be more crashes.
Yes, that is to an extent
more
true.
Dangerous than any other intersection. We're just saying, and that's why they're all arterials, because that's where all the traffic is. So
well, they're not all arterials. There are some examples on the High Crash Network that sort of deviate from that expectation. I will be upfront that volume does play a role in the outcomes of that mapping process.
Right.
But I think that it's also, it's a really the high crash network is a valuable map in showing us where we have some of the most work to do as transportation planners and engineers. Because if the goal is to reduce the raw count down to of traffic fatalities down to zero, we got to look at where the most severe crashes are taking place.
Right, but in today's conversation, that's also where the billboards are. So we have these two ideas that are running into each other.
Yeah,
so,
I do agree. I do agree.
So then my next question, I guess it's a question. I want to be sure I understand. We are faced with the kind of dilemma we run across from time to time. Sometimes we have two soils engineers are telling us, one is saying, bad idea, the other saying, oh no, this is perfectly fine. And today we have you, so we have a bona fide expert with us today. And I want to be sure I understood your opinion. You began, or at some point, you said that the bulk of the data is not conclusive. You can find data that says no distraction. You can find data that says distraction. You can find data that's sort of neutral. However, when you're working in a safety, you're talking about safety, and I'm going to paraphrase you tend to go, your eyes are drawn to the worst case because that's what you should be looking at. And so then you went on to say, I think, this is where I might be putting words in your mouth, that you believe moving from a static billboard to a digital billboard would create more distractions and therefore will be less safe. Is that what you're saying?
So I personally, based on the available information on a wide body of research on the subject, believe that it will to some extent increase distracted driving, and that will to some extent probably increase crash activity at certain locations. I think that is likely. I cannot tell you specifically, because it hasn't happened yet. I can't tell you exactly the extent to that impact. And I think the extent of that impact could vary from intersection to intersection, from corridor to corridor, because as we discussed, it's all incredibly context and site specific.
Right.
But I also, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, we don't get to the context conversation unless we first decided that, and this is where I'm a little concerned, switching from a fixed image to a fixed image that is now made with LEDs is a distraction. That's the part of it where the research does not seem consistent, and I'm not sure that I get it. So, you're the expert. So if you say it is, then it is. But once we get there, then we have the contextual conversation. We don't get to the context unless we decide that moving from static printed vinyl to LEDs is a distraction.
Well, I want to zoom out a little bit, because one thing that's coming to mind as I'm sort of listening to you explain your question is, the fundamental nature of what digital billboards are intended to do, and the fundamental nature is to get more people to look at more advertisements. So I think that we can really get lost in sort of trying to parse out the exact impact of switching from vinyl to electronic, but the reality is that it's about putting more advertising in front of more people. And I also so in terms of switching from vinyl to digital, I think that there's not a great body of research on sort of the impact, the differential between sort of the print version and the digital version. You're correct. There's not a great body of research on that conversion. But I will say, based on the information, particularly eye tracking studies on the subject of digital billboard installations, it seems I'm fairly comfortable expressing that I suspect it will exacerbate distracted driving. And in some locations, that's going to be more of a problem than others, because as we sort of have been parsing out, context really matters, and some of these locations are on our high crash network. They are Vision Zero intersections. They are, as someone else pointed out, some of them are quite high driver demand environments with a lot going on, and the addition of sort of that flickering light in your peripheral vision could be the difference between a traffic crash and just safely traveling through a corridor. So I definitely hear your sort of I definitely hear what you're saying about wanting more information on sort of the conversion between those two. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of great research about the differential between just this, that sort of final version and the electronic version. And I just have to base my professional opinions on the information that is available.
Right. Okay. So getting back to the idea that if we're after safety, we really need to look at the worst case, which is something I've said for a career, for better, for worse. So that then leads us to, well, how do we identify where these high crash areas are? And that's back to context. And that's back to a mountain of research that we don't have, nor will we have in the next 35 minutes. So I'm a little puzzled as to how to proceed, but I think I've got it clear in my mind. The issue of safety, I get it now. So thanks, very helpful.
Sure. And to sort of jump in and provide just a little bit more on that last point you made. When I think about potential next steps in this, I think taking more public works staff time to look at the variables identified in that last memorandum as they relate to corridors where these installations could be put in, that's an option. Like I said, some of that will necessitate more data collection. That's something that we're happy to do. I think one thing that wasn't ready in advance for this meeting, but I have provided PDD, is taking a look at sort of the top 10 wish list sites for the billboard companies, and just making some crash maps based on that, taking a look at proximity of crash to these.
That's an obvious direction too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's certainly some analysis that can be done, and I'm happy to continue on that path if directed to do so.
I have a clarifying question, then I apologize. I'll go to Commissioner Fraglet. You mentioned flickering lights. And my understanding is these would be static images. There's no animation, they're just illuminated. Is that what you meant?
When I say flickering lights, I mean the conversion of one message to another, which does create some, like, at least I don't know that I would describe it as movement, but it's something going on in your peripheral vision.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Fragala and then Commissioner Isaacson.
There we go. That's unmuted. So I did want to think about where we're going with this. I really appreciate the information that Logan has brought forward to us today. And I would really like to encourage that City Council also be provided with some level of information in this area. But in terms of making our decisions, I agree with some of the other commissioners who have spoken about, we have a balance to make here, right? And, I personally really support the Vision Zero project. When we're talking about those traffic fatalities, we're talking about the loss of human life. And Vision Zero implies that we as a community do not support the loss of even one human life. And I support that. But the other piece to think about is our business community and balancing the needs of a very heavily impacted part of our community that's very heavily impacted economically now. And there are benefits to the business community from having these signs. So I'm trying to balance both of those needs in my thinking. So in our recommendation process, I'm wondering when Commissioner Edwards, when you talk about the middle option, right, and that we can make recommendations to amplify certain things to City Council, I believe that we can also make changes to the recommendation, correct? I'm seeing head nods. So I need some clarification on what we're specifically doing. Are we approving the 10-second dwell time, which is the planning department's original recommendation? are we approving not supporting all major arterials, which was the planning department's original recommendation? Because I'd just like to say that I agree with Commissioner Borofsky. I don't support including those two little fuchsia areas, which would be all major arterials. And based on trying to balance the different needs, it would seem like having a longer dwell time might also be part of balancing the needs of both safety and business.
I can chime in here a little bit. So you can do both. You can be specific about some concerns. And so, for instance, if you wanted to be specific about the 10-second dwell time as opposed to the 8 seconds requested by the industry, you could be very specific about that. And you could still raise it as a concern, or you could have a more general concern identified that then we would work to try to come up with some options before we get to council and work through with council with our public works partners. So
but didn't we have an original recommendation that included a 10-second dwell time and included not supporting all major arterials from the planning staff? And it was actually the industry that was asking us to change that. Have we changed that, or have we not changed that?
So the last attachment that had the draft, there were some green highlights that were items that staff recommended changing. That those green highlighted areas more around, for instance, there was the reference to copy that wasn't specific, and so we changed that to display copy to add clarity and be consistent with another reference in code to display copy. And then there were a couple of omissions that were unintended. There was a reference to the industrial billboard section that wasn't included in a non-conforming sign clause. The 10 seconds was what staff proposed originally for dwell time. Industry requested the 8 seconds. However, in the attachment of the draft changes, we basically flagged it as that at that time, staff, meaning Mike and myself, were somewhat, we were supportive of the 8 seconds requested by the industry, and we heard their concerns and reasonings for proposing that. However, we didn't necessarily make that change. We just flagged it as we were also asking transportation staff about it. So now that transportation staff has weighed in and said, basically that longer is better in their opinion, no specific change had occurred on that. And so that's an area that.
So it's still 10.
So it's still 10 as drafted in the proposed amendments.
And it's still not all major arterials. It still does not include the fuchsia. Correct. Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Lauren, do you want to add anything to? Okay. That you weren't
Commissioner Beeson, then Commissioner Taylor.
I think Commissioner Isaacson was ahead of me. I mean, I can go ahead and go if you want. I just raised my hand after he did.
Fine, go ahead.
I'll let him go next.
Well, it's up to you. I'm just saying.
It's possible that Amy unraised his hand. Sorry,
Yeah.
I just took a bite.
And raised Ken's hand, sorry.
Okay, so Commissioner Isaacson was in the queue next, and then Commissioner Beeson?
I think that's right.
Okay, go ahead, Dan.
Thanks. So I think there's two kind of unspoken truths here that are kind of common sense that probably should be aired. And then I have kind of a question for procedure that maybe Commissioner Borofsky, since he has a lot of institutional memory here, might be able to help out with. The first is the industry wouldn't want this if digital signs didn't work. If they didn't grab our attention, they wouldn't want them in there. So that stands the reason that they do work. They get our attention from the road. The question is, do they take enough attention that's going to move the needle on crashes. Well, if you were driving down the road and received the equivalent of that digital sign on your phone and picked it up to look at it, you'd be cited for a crime. Oh, I mean, it's a relatively minor traffic violation, but it's a traffic violation, right? Because we have already established that it coming through on your phone is a distraction enough to warrant sanction through a municipality avenue. So those two things are out there to kind of think about here. What I'd ask though is the idea that we haven't revisited this in 20 years is obviously concerning. Can we make in our recommendation to the city council that we revisit this a year after or 2 years after, whatever we want to do, and have that be our recommendation given the gravity of what we're talking about, and that the data just isn't there and we're not going to be able to get it in the next 30 minutes, nor would they have it likely by the time they take it up. But we can essentially be our own guinea pigs to be able to put it in place, see where the changes need to be, and then revisit it at a later point in time.
So that would be something that you could wrap in. I'm not sure exactly what that would look like. And so I don't have a specific recommendation for you, but I do think that that's a creative option would be to request that staff and council consider whether there are any mechanisms to kind of have the ability to reevaluate the program after, or the code allowances after a certain period of time, or potentially, you know, how do you walk something back if it is, if there, that might be a little tricky. So I'm hesitating to make a specific recommendation beyond let us look into it more and explore options and see whether there's a viable one that we could consider, whether there'd be some measurable way to identify if there is a problem created by a digital billboard, whether there's any way to walk that approval back. Typically, we've tried to avoid some options that are just more difficult to regulate, like leasing a spare, like having in essence a permit that has a lifespan that then is basically in sunsets in 5 years and then has to be re-upped. I think that's tricky. It's not necessarily impossible, and we could definitely explore it and work with council a little bit more if that's a concern that you want to put out there, that that you'd like some reevaluation or an opportunity down the road to kind of reevaluate where we're at. Lauren, anything you want to add to that?
Janessa, thank you. That's basically what I was going to say too. I think it depends. It is often difficult to walk things back once they are included in the code. And so we would need to do some thinking on the front end about whether there are viable options to include some sort of time limitation or check-in. And, you know, in the Public Works memo, they did mention the idea of a pilot program. That might be one option. Certainly, we're not ready to present you with code language about that today. Another option might be what Janessa had mentioned. There may be more options out there that we just haven't thought about. So,
my only follow-up thought would be maybe we can reach out to the insurance lobby, because I mean they're the ones who are paying the bill every time there's an accident. I mean, there was a gentleman who was hit and killed 2 blocks from where I was last week, and there were 2 in that day alone. So somebody is writing a check probably in the next month for everything that just happened last week alone. So my guess is that the insurance industry has some data on digital signs and how it's impacted their actuary tables. I don't know if they'd be willing to share it, but that's where I'd start.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. I'm not sure, again, as kind of Logan mentioned and Commissioner Ramey, teasing apart the difference between a static billboard and a digital billboard's influence on causing a crash. My feeling, based on all of the studies that I have dove into myself, is that that's a really difficult thing to parse apart. And so I think it'd be interesting to see if the insurance industry had any definitive ties to digital billboards and claims. So.
Okay, Commissioner Beeson, you're next. And then The hands are changing. So I have Commissioner Ramey in the queue, but I could swear Commissioner Fragola was in there. Did you, Commissioner Taylor? She was in there. Okay. I'm not touching anything. So there's just hands that are going up and down.
It was
Okay,
me when they scroll down, I accidentally hit the wrong one. So it should be Ken, Chris, and then Kristen.
Okay. That's what I see. Okay. Ken, go ahead.
Thank you. So I don't know that I'm ready to make a motion, but I guess I'm hearing a lot of, I've heard different commissioners talk about kind of where they are with this. I think what I'd like to do is just say briefly kind of where I am, certainly as I came into this and as I've kind of adjusted as I've listened to the discussion. I am ready to support the August 4th draft of the amendments that are proposed by staff, kind of as a foundation. I guess I'm on the track where I would be giving general support plus suggestions. I'm assuming that's where we'll probably land as a group. I heard somewhere, maybe it was Janessa, there was kind of some focus on dwell times, location, and spacing. I think what we have in the draft amendments in terms of location, the arterials as they're currently drafted in there is fine with me. I'm also in agreement with several others I've heard who don't want to add the fuchsia zones. I don't either. I think the spacing that's proposed, the 1,200 feet, is good. The dwell times I find kind of has become pretty fascinating as I've listened to the discussion. When I first read Logan's memo, he talked about dwell times at the end, and that's kind of the closest to a recommendation I read into that memo, where the public works staff was recommending that we go beyond 8 or 10 seconds. Is how I was reading it. And I made a little note that maybe we ought to make it 24 hours. And it was a bit facetious, but I find myself, the more I listen to the discussion, I think traffic safety is extremely important, obviously. And as I kind of keep hearing it, I think the idea of putting some of these digital billboards around town, to the extent that the refresh is instantaneous, which is the way I read our standard right now that we're proposing, it might be that we want to say, gosh, maybe the dwell time, or maybe the times they're on before they refresh, maybe it ought to be a couple of minutes. I don't know how that all works, but I don't know that we need to be wedded to 10 seconds. That seems awfully fast. So beyond that, I guess I'm thinking, to the extent we come up with something we agree on, where we ask Public Works to do some more study time, I would be supportive of that. But I think in general, I'd be ready to go forward with approving the amendment the way it is. I'd briefly say I'm also supportive. I haven't heard it yet today. I'm supportive if we were trying to add something to do with renewable energy. I've taken a look at some of the eWeb rate schedules and how they approach green power. I think it'd be good to talk with them if we were trying to flesh that out, but I support something like that if we wanted to. So I think a lot of the stuff we address in the amendment really gets to safety in terms of the spacing, the auto dimming, the brightness constraints, the height restrictions. I've mentioned location. We even have size restrictions in there. So I think I'm generally supportive of going forward with that, with probably with a couple of suggestions. So thanks.
Thanks, Ken. That was really helpful. Commissioner Ramey, I'll go to you.
Okay, sorry, Commissioner Taylor, got in line ahead of you. So I had a question for the staff. The dwell time, the state standard is 8 seconds plus 2 seconds for transition. I just heard for the first time that we're talking about zero transition. Is the industry okay with that? So just flick from one to the next. Okay, they're okay with that. So then for me, I would actually, the industry said they sell the advertising in 8-second increments. So I would actually say let's double it to 16. So then that's easier for them to actually work with. It fits in their model already. And if there's zero switch time. And then finally, for the rest of the commission, I would ask that we consider, I'm sorry, I had one more staff question. The fuchsia boxes, why did those come off? I need to have some rationale. Why did you originally pull them off? And then finally, go ahead, Mike, you want to answer it now?
Sure. Yeah, I mentioned this before. There was no study or real analysis done, but in talking with our initial discussions with the industry, just hearing them saying like, yeah, we're going to probably have these on major arterials, I made that assumption that those would be longer segments. So I did not go to the street classification and identify the Garfield section between 11th and 6th, and then the Mill Street and the Broadway section before it turns into Franklin as major arterials, even though they are by classification, just thinking of kind of the big spokes of the wheel that we think of when we talk about arterials in layperson's terms. So that is the only reason they were not included. There was no other emphasis or thought really put into it.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful, because I'm trying to say, well, how could I rationalize taking them off if they were already a part of the system? So here for the commission to consider, one idea would be to take the 10 proposed spots the industry said they would like to start with and hand those to Public Works and say, do these fit the Vision Zero criteria, and to what degree do they fit them? And then remove everything else. So we'd start with those 10, we'd have Public Works run them through the filters to see if they work or not, and council then could decide which of those they wanted to go ahead with, rather than having Public Works study all 120 locations. We would just say, these are the 10 they want, let's see if they work. And I have some other things about green power, of course, but I think I can circle back to that in a second. But like Commissioner Beeson, I support requiring green power because it's consistent with Carbon Action Plan. It's consistent with the goal the city already has. And frankly, as citizens, we're giving up this public space. And I think that's a reasonable ask, is that it be supplied by green power.
Okay, Commissioner Taylor, and then followed by Commissioner Borofsky.
So thank you, Commissioner Ramey. You actually touched on some of my follow-up items, and I just want to say to the group is that I am always uncomfortable and would highly recommend that we as planning commissioners stay away from the arbitrary. If we don't have enough information to make a decision, I do not like to create like from 10 seconds to 12 seconds. For instance, Commissioner Ramey just said industry switches at every 8 seconds. I like information. I feel like our role is to evaluate information. And if the information is not there, our recommendation is what can we do to get the information to have an informed decision? As a user of the code, there are a lot of implications when arbitrary information or data is added to a code section. And you don't necessarily know what those implications are until it starts to actually be in use. So I don't want to be part of the problem. So I like information. I personally have been trying to figure out a way to kind of look at the creative options. And Lauren Commissioner Isaacson started, Lauren added, Commissioner Ramey has just added his thoughts. I am open to options. Maybe I would be inclined to send it back to staff so they can be thoughtful about what those options would be. I actually like Commissioner Ramey's in terms of all of the kind of the synopsis or consensus of how do we start with a pilot program? What might it look like based on the information in front of us now? I also am willing to take that billboard piece and say, hey, we want to follow up from staff about what would those option, what could be an option. I think more study needs to be done. I like the idea, especially because there isn't a lot of existing jurisdictions that we can borrow from, of creating a pilot program of maybe these 10. I'm not actually a proponent necessarily of just holistically removing the fuchsia area right now. Like Mike McCarroll said, they didn't do the study. So it seems there are already billboards there. So I do like the idea, maybe if there's a equitable way to make a first step forward, I would like to do that. So those are some of I'm going to keep listening. So you know my perspective, but definitely I am not going to be a proponent of throwing out 12 seconds, 14 seconds. I'm not going to be a proponent of removing certain sections unless there is a reason and we can actually defend that. Thank you.
Kristen, I'm going to Commissioner Borowski, and then I'm going to put myself in the queue. Lauren, I do have your hand up. Are you wanting to answer a question or something? Yeah, go ahead.
If I might quickly, I just want to clarify the discussion. I think we're all on the same page, but just to make sure that we are, just a reminder that this is a legislative proposal. So Planning Commission is making a recommendation to council, not your own decision. So some of the things that have been coming up, the recommendation would be recommend to council to send it back to staff to do more work or. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very helpful, actually. Okay, Commissioner Borowski, then I'm going to go, and then Commissioner Fragla.
Thank you. Well, for me, I heard some things from Commissioner Fragla that made some sense. You know, I'm a small business owner, and I am not in a position right now to buy a full billboard. I could probably buy 10 seconds on a billboard every, 45 minutes or something like that. This coming from somebody who, after COVID came out, put on a squirrel suit and stood out in front of my restaurant to try and get customers to come in. So I know that you need to do things to drive business to your establishment. However, I'm not comfortable with a couple of things that I see here. One is that this whole process and most of the testimony that we've received, I would say the vast majority of the testimony we received and the way the process was initiated all came from the industry. Industry went to the city council and said, this is something we want. And I haven't heard but a few people give testimony about, hey, do you want digital billboards in the city of Eugene or not? The actual person on the street. And I think if you if I walked out into my dining room right now and said, do you want digital billboards in the street? I would probably get a little bit more input than I've gotten as far as public input here. So that gives me a little bit of pause, because once they go up, that is when the public input happens. I can give you a specific example of that if you'd like, but and then I get back to the Vision Zero. Vision Zero is a plan that has been put forward by the city of Eugene as a goal. And for me, this doesn't seem like it meshes well with Vision Zero. So for that part of it, I can't move forward with it. I would probably vote to not move it forward, even though I could utilize it in my business. To me, the safety of the community is more important than getting a pizza put up on a billboard for 8 seconds. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, thanks, John. I'm going to chime in because I think it'll be helpful. And I think I appreciated Ken. I appreciated kind of understanding where everybody is and why. I definitely would be supportive of moving it forward. I think that that's the direction of council. And I think that, you know, I mean, we want to be innovative, an innovative community. And I think there's a lot of benefits. But I also I'm a proponent of the Vision Zero work. And so I do think that acknowledging that there is a little bit of a delicate balance that's needed to be struck here. To me, it would not eliminate not moving forward with you know, digitizing billboards, but I do think that the three areas, for me, it's less dwell times but more location spacing. I'm kind of in agreement with Commissioner Taylor. I don't actually see why the pink areas have been omitted, simply because if you actually drive those areas, it's a continuous, you know, roadway, especially the area that connects Mill Street and Broadway and Franklin. The streets just happen to kind of shift. So, but again, I am in the same boat where I would like to hear from the community more, get some more information that's more consistent. I don't know if anybody else, I printed this out and, you know, rummaged through it. And it's like for every study that says one thing, there's a study that says something else. And so I do think that at the end of the day, it's a community decision. And so I would like council to be advised to really pay close attention to what the community wants and these three specific areas, but I would not shy away from moving forward with the draft that was proposed by staff on the August 4th meeting. So that's where I'm at as well. I know that it's complex and there's a lot of nuance here, and there's you know, like I said, there's benefits. There's obviously going to be some growing pains with this, like anything. So that's where I'm at. But I just wanted to chime in, and I've got Janessa wants to speak. Go ahead.
I'll just chime in real quick. I do want to check in a little bit because we're focusing so much on the digital billboards component, and while that is the most significant part of the code amendments, just to kind of, you know, recenter ourselves too around whether that holdup is enough. That, you know, are there issues with the other parts of the changes in the code that we've proposed? So just kind of make sure that we're hearing about all of them. My assumption is that there's nothing raising any concern in the other amendments, but it would be nice to have a little bit of clarity provided on that to make sure that that's not just an assumption. Also, just to do a time check, and in terms of, it might be helpful to check in on whether we're looking at kind of that second thing of proposed to go forward, but let's identify some concerns, in which case we might want to start doing some of that work on identifying what the specific concerns are and how you want to qualify that to council for us, and we can certainly take that forward.
Oh, sorry. Just to follow up with what you said. So I would be in support of moving things forward and acknowledging that there are these three areas that we have had a lot of discussion about and have not landed on any particular recommendation, such as the dwell time being 8 seconds, 10 seconds, 16 seconds. So I guess I'm clarifying that with you, that we can basically say we support moving forward the process, sending it to council, letting them have their public hearing and everything else, but that there are these three pieces that we did not have enough information and did not hear enough from the public, other stakeholders, whatnot, to have a definitive recommendation as far as how many seconds, exactly where they can be, and the spacing of those. If, for example, that's what we could say.
So my questions were actually exactly about those two things.
Okay.
Can I ask them?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to recognize that we've had no discussion about the other parts of the recommendation, and I'm taking that as a signal that the majority of this commission may be comfortable with the rest of the recommendations. I know I am comfortable with the other suggestions for digital signboards or digital messaging centers, whichever one we're calling. And I don't know if we want to break that one out and go ahead with it separately, or if people do have concerns. And then my question was, if we didn't feel comfortable moving the digital signboards ahead today, could you remind me, when is it being presented to council? And is there another opportunity for us to take a look at it? If you could answer the timeline question, please, Janessa.
Sure, and thank you for bringing that up. That's actually a really good thing to touch base on. So we're scheduled right now to hold a public hearing at council on September 21st. So we are getting up to the point where we'll need to be putting out the notices and getting everything in ready for that meeting. One of my concerns personally, this was a councilor prior poll that initiated this whole thing, and he did not go for re-election. And so there was a definite direction from council to try to move this project forward. As you recall, I was working on Clear and Objective before, and that kind of got put off to the side and slowed down a little bit so that I could focus on the digital sign amendments. And I believe that that is in large part to try to get it before council while Councilor Pryor is still on council. So that doesn't mean.
So we have a pretty short timeline. So it doesn't sound like there's time for it to come back. So well, I did want to address some of the things you said, Tiffany, based on that understanding. I can support moving this recommendation forward. And I wanted to clarify that it's for a 10-second dwell time, and it does not include the fuchsia areas. I'm hoping the rest of the commissioners understand adding the fuchsia areas in is a change, not taking them out. Adding them is a change. And I would want to request in our recommendation that the city council receive the transportation report, as well as an opportunity to hear about transportation's idea of a pilot program. I'd also like for the city council to receive a map that includes highlighting of the Vision Zero high crash streets and high crash intersections. And I would also like to recommend to city council that longer dwell times are considered at high crash areas and high pedestrian areas. So I'm not saying that I just want to forward it with saying we need more public input. I'm personally saying that I'm forwarding it with concerns that I feel need to be amplified. And I think after hearing Commissioner Borofsky talk as a business owner, that also contributed more to me moving towards the concern zone, even though he's only one person. I know we will have opportunity for input to the city council, but so that's where I'm falling personally. It's not just that I think we need more time, that we're moving these forward because we want more input from the public, but I have concerns and I'd like them to be noted.
I'm glad you mentioned also, Commissioner Fragola. I was going to say before, we had identified kind of the three main issues: the dwell time, the location, and the spacing, as being specific things that to either flag as concerns and to continue trying to refine that as we go forward to council. The fourth thing that kind of has gelled for me a little bit listening to your discussions today is around the, exploring the idea of a pilot program or some sort of mechanism to reevaluate the program after some amount of time. So that seems to be something that would you may want to wrap into the recommendation. In terms of the crash data map and everything, we will definitely be providing that to council as well. Any information that's come in. The only reason that the 10 maps that Logan referenced earlier, we didn't put them out to you is just because the timing. It would have been giving them to you a couple hours before the meeting and with no real reasonable amount of time to look at them or make meaning out of it. But we'll certainly continue working with our public works representatives and trying to refine the information and get more specific as we move towards council. If that answers.
Thank you, Jan.
Oh, you're muted, Tiffany.
Commissioner Taylor.
I'm not sure what is the most effective, Commissioner Edwards. I am in support of the kind of synopsis of Commissioner Fragola, with the one exception is that I would like to present less of a concern and more of a recommendation that Public Works does additional study. It feels like actually in terms of the billboards, we don't have enough information. Because of the fact that we haven't adopted Vision Zero plan. I mean, if we didn't have that, I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? Is you've got the safety, we have a community-based, we have a study that, we have a plan that's been adopted, that's had public process and input, it's Vision Zero, and then we've got these billboards, and we don't necessarily have enough information to understand how it impacts these high crash corridors. So what I completely agree with Commissioner Fragola. I like the way that's presented, and I would recommend a pilot program rather than wholesale adoption of digital billboards as presented, because it is hard to go back, is to have a pilot program. I like Commissioner Ramey's 10 identified by the industry pilot. Additional study by Public Works, recommends City Council moves that forward. Obviously we have some grant money, so maybe it's a slower process for the billboards to address some of the concern. So, but I'm recognizing it's 107, so I'm not sure if it's helpful for a motion or if there's, so I'm gonna look at you for direction for most efficient next steps.
Okay, I just want to clarify. I've got two more folks in the queue, but I just want to clarify the pilot program would, let me see. So a pilot program, the challenge with the pilot, a pilot program in the true sense of the definition being like something we try, and if it doesn't work out, we undo it. That's the piece that I'm, are you suggesting starting out on a smaller scale than potentially expanding? Okay.
That's the way I understood Commissioner Ramey's. If we study it, if we don't have any examples, and there aren't other jurisdictions that necessarily have the analysis. So it would be a slow rollout, essentially, for us to be able to study and evaluate what the implications are so that we can be accountable to the Vision Zero plan, as well as any adoption, wholesale adoption of switchover.
If I could say something on the pilot option real quick. It would be nice if we could leave it a little bit general in your recommendation, just to give staff the latitude to explore other mechanisms, because since there's not like a really clear, this is exactly what we want to do. I think that the pilot idea that Public Works put forward has merit and makes sense to some degree. However, I expect that the industry is not going to be really interested in that. There's not a single one of their top 10 that is on Highway 99. And so it feels to me like to go directly there would be a big disconnect from the kind of the direction that they brought this whole thing to Councilor Pryor for. However, I do think that there's possibility to look at some mechanism to just slow down the adoption process and to allow us to have a sense of control over how we're applying them, so that we don't just have 60 digital billboards around town all of a sudden, which was the capacity, if you recall from the map analysis that we'd done originally. We estimated that about 60 of the billboards could be potentially converted to digital. So I'm just asking that we keep that broad enough in the recommendation to allow us to be creative around how we would implement a pilot program.
So I just wanted to follow, Janessa, thank you. I'll just chime in to end my piece, is that I think the flexibility is important, because I expressed it earlier. I feel even uncomfortable providing specific options. You haven't had enough time to look at it. It's just what's the most effective way, bringing public works planning to do maybe a slower rollout, so that we don't have larger implications where we do nothing. 2, we roll it out too fast, and there is direct implication to Vision Zero that we end up finding out. So I agree. So thank you for that point.
Sorry. Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. Although I'm in favor of a lot that's been said here, I think it's important to note that we've spent about 6 hours in Zoom meetings talking about this, plus the time that we spent studying it, preparing for the Zoom meetings. When we make a recommendation to council, chances are it's going to be a 45-minute work session and a decision will be made. So, like I said earlier, I agree with what you guys are saying as far as slow rolling it, and a lot of what Lisa and those type of people said. I'm still going to vote no. I'm in favor of what you guys are saying. So when you see my no vote, it's not because of that. It's because I want to be able to say that I voted no against digital signs in the city of Eugene, and for the safety reason. And that'll be why. And I think that it hasn't been, like Commissioner Taylor said, it hasn't quite been fleshed out enough. And I've got a feeling that it's going to go to a public hearing at City Council, and whatever recommendation we make will probably go forward.
Okay, thanks, John. Commissioner Ramey.
So I have first a process issue. I'm not comfortable with supporting what's currently proposed because I'm not sure it captures our sense. So if I understood the current proposal, it's basically what's in front of us, the fuchsia boxes and the 10-second dwell time. And that doesn't work for me. It would have to say, we didn't come to conclusion about the fuchsia boxes or the 10-second dwell time. And so therefore, those need to be examined. I don't want us to be portrayed as saying they support, because I don't support the fuchsia, and maybe we have to get a vote to sort that out. But I could support it if we were more clear about, well, it's 99% of this document, plus these 4 areas we're still not sure about. Here's what was written in the document, but we also discussed these other alternatives. I just don't want it to think that we're somehow supporting what's written there when I don't know that, at least I'm not. So then my next comment was circling back once more to the Green Power initiative, the idea that be added as a requirement to the digital billboard section. It could be item K or something in that list of things I have to do. And I don't know how, Chair, we push this forward, or if that can be, maybe it's just in the staff notes that says, and one person wanted this to happen. Somehow elevating it to that level is what I'd like to do.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying. I would support that as well, Chris, just because I think that's exactly what we've kind of all been talking about, is a motion that would move us forward to the next stage, but clarifying that we did not come to a concise conclusion on those three elements. And I think that's exactly what staff had presented as our second option. So Janessa, am I wrong?
You're correct. No, you're correct. And I wanted to point out that as the draft standards are now, it's with a 10-second dwell time. So you can spotlight that and say, want to consider something else, but 10 is what's written in now. The spacing is 1,200 feet. That has not changed. So even though we brought that up, it's not necessarily been the industry didn't ask us to change that. It was more of something that we talked about in the first deliberation as being a possible way to control kind of proliferation, that it might reduce down the number of possible capacity in the city. So we have the 60 based on the 1,200 foot spacing, and Mike has done some preliminary analysis. And for if we were to increase that to 2,000 feet, then it would still be around 40 something, some odd digital billboards that could be converted. And then if we went to even 4,000, it's still like 30 something. So there's fine tuning that spacing requirement could be a way to reduce the overall. However, now that it seems like the majority of the commission is supporting the idea of more of a pilot program, I'm not sure that the spacing is something to get too bogged down in, because doing some sort of a pilot rollout would be a way to address those concerns as well. And since nobody's really suggested any different spacing, I'm just going to kind of put it out there that I think that one's one item that is probably fine to leave it as it is, unless you have a different concern. The fuchsia areas are also not included in the draft right now. As it stands, those are still excluded from the areas that would allow conversion to a digital billboard. So that's another one where you would need to, you could still flag it as a concern that you want us to refine and do more work with public works staff to evaluate based on their concerns and Vision Zero crash data and everything, whether that would change any of those locations where we would allow them. But as the draft is, it's the major arterials excepting those three areas that were boxed out in fuchsia on the map.
Okay, Lauren, go ahead. I know you have a clarifying, and then Lisa, I'll go to you.
I thought perhaps it would be helpful for me to try to articulate a motion, which then councilors can, or I'm sorry, planning commissioners can speak to this. So, and I understand that planning commissioners aren't necessarily all coming from the same place. So this is not intended to reflect any specific planning commissioners' comments, but kind of a general sense of what I feel like I'm hearing. Obviously, this you can do something other than the motion that I'm about to articulate. So here we go. Move to recommend adoption of the draft code proposed by staff and included in the August 11th Planning Commission packet with two clarifications. First, that Planning Commission did not come to a conclusion about and does not express support for the location of digital billboards as included in the draft code, specifically the fuchsia areas, or the dwell time. And the second clarification is Planning Commission further recommends that council give staff direction to explore other options and mechanisms to slow down the conversion of digital billboards within the city to allow time to further study potential traffic impacts due to those digital billboards. Options could include, but are not limited to, a pilot program, a limited duration approval, and or a limited rollout. Too much?
Well, Lisa, I want to go to you, but I just quickly, pilot program and rollout to me was the same thing. I wouldn't support a pilot program as they're typically defined, but a slow rollout I would support. So I don't know if that's, okay. I apologize. Lisa and then Dan.
So I feel like when we were many of the commissioners were discussing a pilot, they were actually recommending the top 10 signs, right? Not what transportation originally recommended as the River Road study or Highway 99. And so I feel like that's a really important clarification to make, that I heard several commissioners talk about the top 10 signs that the industry is in favor of. And so I did have an idea for a motion as well to move us forward. And I wanted to recommend that we approve the reader boards and electronic messaging centers separate from the digital billboards component, so that we split this into two decisions, because I feel like there is some clarity, and I haven't heard anybody address the electronic messaging center or reader boards with any concerns. And I'm wondering, so I'm just going to make a motion to move us forward. I'm making a motion that we split this into two votes. One that approves the digital reader boards, electronic messaging center parts of the code, and one that addresses the digital billboards. And I guess we could vote on whether or not we want to split it, and it can go yes or no, and that'll help us move forward.
Is there a second to that motion? Split into two. Okay. Okay.
Great, that answers my question. Thank you.
I don't have a second. I do have several other folks in the queue, so I'm going to go to Commissioner Isaacson. Go ahead, Dan.
I'm really leaning toward Commissioner Borowski's comments. I don't think that we have enough data to be able to even propose what the next step is. We're supposed to be the gateway of taking all the data, coming up with a recommendation, handing it out to another body who admittedly is going to take a relatively short period of time to take our recommendation and put it into play. But we've spent the past hour or so recognizing that most of the data either doesn't exist or don't have it. And we all recognize that there are serious concerns we have with it. So it's hard for me to, unless someone can help me mesh those two together, how we acknowledge the deficiencies of that argument and still hand it off to another group of body and say, we recognize all these deficiencies and problems, here, you deal with it. That is causing problems for me.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. Kristen.
So I think Lauren's motion actually does that, Commissioner Isaacson. I'm one of the people that talked about the pilot program. I prefer the way, so to clarify what Commissioner Fragola said, is I want to provide flexibility. I don't want to actually explicitly explain what that option is. I have concerns similar to Commissioner Borowski. I don't think we have enough information. And actually we consistently have talked about that in terms of location, fuchsia area, and the dwell time. And so I think actually Lauren's motion, I mean, she chuckled. I think it gets at what we've talked about. So I'm going to just try this. I'm going to make a motion to actually move forward with Lauren's proposed motion.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second for discussion.
Okay. Any discussion? I do have Chris Ramey in the queue.
Thank you. So I just wanted to clarify a couple things that when I was talking about the 10 moving forward, that was moving forward for a study by Public Works to see if it met Division 0. So it wasn't assuming that those would just advance forward. There was another level that I was putting on them, which is some sort of a combination between a pilot and a slow rollout. The idea being you would only allow these 10 to go forward, but they would have to meet a certain set of criteria in order to go forward. And then secondly, for me, the whole location issue is just that. I mean, I would just say, those are the 10 locations, period. And that's it. That would be my recommendation, assuming they meet this other set of hurdles. So whether they were 1,200 feet apart or 2,000 feet apart didn't matter to me at that point. And then finally, I can support this motion, and I don't know if I can get it amended to include the clean power provision, or if that has just completely fallen off the radar here in our quest for more information about safety.
I'm open. Sorry, hand braid. I'm open to a friendly amendment. I always have a hard time. I don't remember Robert's rules of order, so
That's okay.
I'm open to that friendly amendment in terms of adding the green power, if that's the appropriate time to add it.
And I'm okay with that as a second.
I do a quick clarification. Lauren, I think when you read the motion the first time, I think you said you referred to it as a mechanism such as a pilot program or slow rollout. Could you read that sentence again?
Yeah. So this, I won't read the whole motion again, but the second kind of clarification was, as I read it, recommend that council give staff direction to explore other options and mechanisms to slow down conversion of digital billboards to allow further study of potential traffic impacts. Options could include, but are not limited to, a pilot program, a limited duration approval, and or a limited rollout.
I just wanted to point out that that was a gentle, and we were keeping it a little higher level with that language around what mechanism that looks like, not necessarily a pilot program or the pilot program referenced in the Public Works memo. I feel like there's enough latitude there for us to explore options based on what you've brought up.
Okay, so is that motion amended and then seconded by John? Is that how it could work, Lauren? You'll have to, are we good with that?
So
and we're still under discussion. So I have.
Yeah, we're still under discussion. It sounds like both the motion maker and the second were open to an amendment related to green power, renewable power.
Okay.
I can try to articulate what that
Could
might
we put it in the chat
No.
or show it on the screen? Can we show it on the screen?
I don't have it written in a way that I can show it on the
Share it.
screen.
Okay.
Raglan, I'm sorry. I just hand wrote it out as you were talking.
Okay.
So in terms of the green renewable energy, that could be an actual amendment to the motion, or Commissioner Ramey, as you mentioned, it could also just be some direction from commission to staff to give council more information about today's discussion, including that, you know, at least 2 commissioners were interested in pursuing renewable energy options. A couple of other commissioners may have been interested in, you know, some other things. So you can do it either way. If it's the direction to staff to kind of bullet point out for council some of the more important parts of the commission discussion, then you know, we don't have to try to figure out exactly how to word the motion, especially if it's, you know, 2 commissioners that are interested in that and the rest of the commission is less interested. I leave it up to the commission. You have lots of options. It sounds like motion maker and the second were amenable to an amendment. So I guess I'm looking for direction about whether the commission, is that something, Commissioner Ramey, that you really want in terms of an amendment to the motion, or is it something that you just would like flagged for council that that's important to you?
Lauren, there was an amendment to the motion that was approved by Kristen, a friendly amendment that was approved by Kristen and was approved by me. It's part of the motion.
Okay.
Right. It is the motion. So
Right.
Clarifying question, I put myself in the queue. Would it, if we were to say that the commission would like to provide testimony at the council's public hearing to provide all kinds of clarification, would that be something that would need to be incorporated into this motion? Or is that something that I guess we really don't have time to craft that, but I just thought if that was something that this body was interested in doing, we could certainly write, you know, 2 minutes worth of information that would help them understand our position.
So I would say if Planning Commission wants to, if someone from Planning Commission wants to appear at the council public hearing and speak on behalf of the Planning Commission, I would ask for a separate motion wherein the Planning Commission delegates that person the authority to do so. You're obviously free to show up in your individual capacity and talk at the public hearing. In terms of the motion on the table, the amendment could read something like, so instead of 2 clarifications, 3 clarifications, and the third clarification would be recommend that council give staff direction to explore options for green and or renewable energy related to digital billboards. I see Commissioner Brodsky is nodding. I can't see Commissioner Taylor.
She's no longer with us.
Uh-oh. Well, we are at 1:30, folks. So, okay. So I have John still in the queue. I'm trying to wrap up and get a vote out of you all. So John, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm in favor of kind of what's going on here. Again, I'm going to vote no against it, but and you know my reasons behind that, so I don't need to articulate that. The one thing that I would be cautious of and hope that staff would recognize is that the 10 billboards that were put forward by industry. They may be in places that are Vision Zero areas that we wouldn't want to have them as a pilot program. So taking the 10 spots that the industry says, this is where the most traffic is, let's try it here. That doesn't work for me. I would lean more towards what Public Works feels is an appropriate spot. So with that said, I'll let the motion take a vote, and you know how I'm going to vote.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, I'm going to call for a vote. All of those in favor of the motion before us, raise your hand. We do not have Commissioner Taylor. So yeah, I don't know. Okay, so I see 3. Okay, all those opposed? 3. So the motion does not pass. Do we have another motion that we might consider? Does anybody, does anybody want to make another motion? Is there a motion that someone could support that voted no that you could maybe suggest to us, or taking what Lauren gave us as a motion, taking that wording? Is there an amendment to that you would like to see? Okay, well, so are we back to the other 2 options, which would be moving it forward as is or not moving it forward at all?
Dan has his hand
on
up.
either of those options. Okay, I have Commissioner Isaacson in the queue.
I would be willing to go change my vote if someone will accept a friendly amendment to the previous of appointing someone to go and relay our concerns to the city council. So it's not a pass through, that they recognize that there is an urgency behind a lot of the deliberations that we had, and to spend a little bit more time on it. And if I trust that this body will communicate that message, and hope and trust the city council will take that up with the same urgency. Oh,
I'm going to respond, and then I'm going to let staff chime in. The challenge is timing. We don't have time to reassemble. So our meeting is already past due, and we will not have adequate time to craft what we would want to say as a body. However, generally when staff presents to council, they relay the conversations. They go back and they watch the videos. They go back and look at the minutes, and they do a careful job of conveying to council what the concerns that were expressed were. If maybe staff could clarify, Janessa, if you could speak to that.
Well, this is kind of taking me back to clear and objective and the tree issues, where for those of you who were on the commission at that time, if you recall, I definitely was very upfront with council that that was an issue that we really kind of spun on with at the commission level and weren't able to come to a real clear conclusion. And at that point, they recommended to kick it back and sent us back to you to work through. So that's still a possibility, and we can definitely convey the fact that, especially around this safety issue and the impacts on our transportation system and our Vision Zero efforts, that this was a real sticking point for the commission, and that you really struggled with coming to a definitive recommendation for them. So I think that we can definitely convey that, and we wouldn't be going forward to council and saying, oh, here's what they recommended and we're good. We would definitely be providing them the context of the difficulty of your deliberations.
Okay, so then I'm going to ask Lauren and Janessa for a suggestion on best way to proceed. We would have to, I really feel like we would need to take a vote to extend our meeting for another 10 minutes. Can I get a motion for that?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, second. Okay, all those in favor? Extending the meeting? Okay, any opposed? Okay, so that takes care of that. So I would look to any recommendations you might have on whether or not there's a motion that we could get behind that could suggest, sorry, what are you pointing at, John?
I'm pointing at Lisa, who's got her hand up, and then myself, who has my.
Oh, well, on my screen, you're pointing to the wall. So, okay, go ahead, Commissioner Fragola, go ahead.
I wanted to say that I had a motion.
Okay, go ahead.
And it goes back to what I said earlier. So I would move that we approve the digital signboards and electronic messages. And I feel like the digital billboards is a no recommendation. And that we recommend no because of the things that we couldn't come to a conclusion on. And I think that indicates to City Council that we feel like there's a need for a lot more work. And I appreciate the thinking that a certain council member who is stepping down in January would like to be part of this decision. But I also, knowing Councilman Pryor, I don't think he would encourage us to rush the decision just so he could be present when it's made, right? I'm sure he would support doing this effectively. So not that I'm gonna say anything for him, but so I guess I'm looking at a motion that allows us to move forward with the signboards, but that is a no on the billboards, on the digital billboards, because of all of the things that we've expressed.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion? John, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I could probably get on board with this one. Unfortunately, I think that the fact that, oh, here comes Commissioner Taylor's back. I was going to say, if Commissioner Taylor had been in the room for the last vote, I believe it probably would have passed. And then I was going to speak to the fact that our bylaws do allow the chair or vice chair to address the city council on decisions that we had made, as long as you represent the majority opinion of the planning commission. So Tiffany or Lisa could go to the city council for the public hearing and speak to it, as long as you convey the majority decision, and that's written in our bylaw.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, so Kristen, are you there? I don't know. I see your name, but I don't know if I can unmute you.
Just in a chat saying she can't.
She's commenting.
Raise her hand. Can she still vote?
We have a motion on the table that was seconded, so we would need to vote on that.
So the motion, so Lisa, could you maybe repeat your motion for Kristen, just so she knows what we're voting on? And
I've heard
Okay.
the motion. I can't raise,
Okay.
I'm sorry, my phone died and I tried to get in, and the public, just so you guys all know, the public connection actually doesn't work. It says the meeting's not valid. So we might not have public participation because of that. But so I did hear the motion. It sounds like we can't go back, and I'm super sorry that I wasn't there to vote. Yeah. So I heard the motion.
Okay. So all of those in favor of the motion as Commissioner Fragola articulated, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Okay, those opposed, raise your hand.
I have to know what the motion is, sorry.
This is the motion to move forward with the other components, but then not move forward with digital billboards.
And expressing
We're voting not to move. This motion would say to not move forward with adoption of a process for digital billboards.
No, that can I clarify what the motion was?
Yes, please do. Yes,
So,
that's what I had heard it to say.
Yeah, so Tiffany got the first part correct. So the motion is to move forward with all the components for messaging and message centers, to recommend on digital billboards that we are not approving we're not recommending what's in front of us because of all of the concerns that we listed before. We want to see more studies. We want to see the energy stuff added, all of those other pieces that we had listed before. Not that we're voting down digital billboards altogether, but we're not approving this recommendation because of the list of things we discussed.
Okay. So.
Did that help at all, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay, so we got 3 in favor, and then I'd ask for a vote on those opposed, and you and Kristen had not yet voted. So those opposed, go ahead and raise your hands. Okay, do I need to go? Chris, do I need to go back to the original? Okay.
You need to read. Yeah.
All right. Those in favor of the motion. Okay, 4. Those opposed. Kristen, can you tell us how you vote?
I abstain.
Okay. So the motion, Commissioner Fragola's motion carries. I will not be able, sorry. I will not be able to testify, so that I will have to leave that up to Lisa to testify at council.
You're muted, Commissioner Fragola.
I was not a member of the prevailing vote, so and I will be testifying on my own behalf. So I will not be able to testify to represent.
When is the meeting?
September
21st, September 21st.
Yeah, what time of day for us individuals?
7:30.
Is that a Wednesday?
If it's a public hearing, it'll be Monday night at 7:30. Monday, September 21st at 7:30.
Okay. I think I can do that.
Commissioner Fragola, if you can't, and it's okay with the commission, I think I have to attend that meeting for another board or commission that I'm at. I think I have to do that for the growth monitoring. So I will be attending at least the 5:30 work session of that.
Is it appropriate for me to delegate it to Commissioner Borofsky, or am I allowed to do that under our bylaws?
Looks like you can under the bylaws. Yes.
Okay, it's just that things are going back to school crazy time. So I would like to defer that responsibility to Commissioner Borowski. Do we need to vote on it?
That would make it very official and would be
Okay.
clear that everyone was okay with that.
So if I could entertain a motion that could clarify.
I will make a motion, sure.
Okay.
So I'm making a motion that we are delegating the responsibility of addressing City Council on September 21st for the majority opinion to Commissioner Borowski. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Well, just to,
Wait.
yeah.
Can we have a
Just
discussion? really
Sure, sure. I apologize. Yes, I
Yeah.
forgot that step.
quick? Go ahead, Commissioner Borowski. Yeah.
So again, as it states in the bylaws, I would only be able to talk about what the majority decision of the council or the commission was. Basically, what I would tell them, what I'm thinking is that we felt comfortable with the first section of it, and that there were concerns that there needed to be more study, research, and integration with other city plans, i.e. Vision Zero, climate recovery, those types of things. And that's why we couldn't come to a consensus to move forward. Does that sound kind of where the commission's at?
Anybody, any other discussion on that?
No.
I did not vote for that, so I would disagree, but that's why I'm not going to be the one speaking. So I need those of you who voted with the majority to make sure that your views are represented. And so I would say, I personally trust that John can
I do
articulate what the conversation is, so I'm comfortable with that. So, I will, if there is no further discussion, I'll call for a vote. Okay, so those in favor of Commissioner Fragola handing off the council. I'm not sure what I'm trying to. Those in favor, raise your hand.
I'm in favor.
Okay, so any opposed? Okay, so that was unanimous. So Commissioner Borowski, you're on deck for that. Okay, so we took care of a few things today. So are there any other items from staff? I know we're now a couple minutes past, but I just want to make sure that we don't have anything else that we need to take care of.
Good afternoon.
Vanessa, Lauren, Gabe?
I'll just jump in and say, in the interest of time, we don't have any major updates, but the next scheduled public hearing would be for the commission on September 15th. It's at 5:30. We'll be bringing forward an ordinance on time extensions for existing land use approvals. We do have a meeting currently scheduled on September 8th, but we don't have any items listed on the agenda, and I hesitate to cancel that meeting until Alyssa's back from vacation. So stay tuned on any calendar update.
Okay. Wonderful. Thanks, Gabe. Okay, if there's nothing else, Commissioner Borowski.
Just one thing, Janessa, if it would be possible to kind of touch base, to kind of go over the notes so that I'm on the same page as what you guys heard. Maybe you and Lauren and me could touch base that Monday. I'll be out the week before that, so I won't be at the meeting on the 15th. But perhaps that Monday morning we could just touch base so that I could run by what I'm thinking of saying and see if it reflects what you guys have heard too. Because I don't want to stand up there and say things that don't represent what you heard from the commission. You could be my third wheel.
Okay, is there a time of day on that Monday for me to look at scheduling for you?
Is 8:30 too early?
Nope.
Yeah, let's do 8:30 to 9.
Okay. I'll send you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. I'm gonna go ahead and meeting adjourned.